We're getting ready now for the final session of the day, and our speaker is Professor Doug Vakoch. Do we have someone who will provide an introduction for Professor Vakoch?
Professor Douglas Vakoch is president of METI, a non-profit research and educational organization dedicated to transmitting intentional signals to nearby stars, as well as fostering sustainability of human civilization on multi-generational timescales, a prerequisite for a project that could take centuries or millennia to succeed. Dr. Vakoch serves as a general editor of Springer's Space and Society series, as well as Lexington's book, Eco-Critical Theory and Practice series. His work has been featured in such publications as the New York Times, Nature, Science, and Der Spiegel. And he has been interviewed on radio and television shows on the BBC, NPR, ABC, the Science Channel, the Discovery Channel, and many others. You may take over, Scott.
Thank you. And I will simply hand the microphone over to Professor Vakoch to offer his presentation. Thank you.
Thanks very much. As was noted during the introduction, I work with an organization called METI, Messaging Extraterrestrial Intelligence. And so our main activity is to send radio signals to nearby stars in the hope of getting a response. And the big question always is, what should we say in such a message? And typically the content of those messages has focused on science, math and science. And the reason being that we don't expect any aliens on other planets to know English or Hindi or Arabic. But if you can build a radio telescope, you probably know something as fundamental as 2 + 2 = 4. If not, you're not going to be a very good engineer. And so that's what we focus on. The problem with those kind of messages, though, is if the only thing we're talking about with another civilization is what they already know, then what's the point of the whole thing? And so we have sent out a few symbolic messages in the past. There was a powerful transmitter from, at the time, the world's largest radio telescope in Arecibo, Puerto Rico in 1974 that sent a brief 3-minute message, sort of giving a snapshot of humanity in basic scientific concepts. There have been messages attached to spacecraft. For example, the Voyager Pioneer plaque launched in 1977 by NASA included over 100 images of Earth, music from around the world, greetings in 55 languages. So that's the kind of message that actually begins to capture the complexity and the richness of human life. And that arguably is what we have to offer to another civilization. I think our natural tendency when we reach out to a stranger is to present ourselves at our best. We want to show that we're wise. We want to show that we're powerful. And yet, if you think about the sort of civilization that we could make contact with, we're not likely to be very wise or powerful in comparison. And the reason is because if we do make contact, it's virtually certain that that other civilization will be longer lived than we are, that they will have had the technology to communicate much longer than we have. So we humans have had the ability to send radio signals for just a century. If that's the norm in our galaxy, a civilization lasts for 100 years and then it either annihilates itself or turns inward, then given the 13 billion year history of the galaxy, it's incredibly unlikely that we and they will exist at the same time. So the only way we'll make contact is if they've been doing this much longer than we have. And so then the question is, what do we have to say that would be of interest? We may not teach them a lot about anything in sophisticated science. And so I think that's where topics like the coronavirus pandemic come in, because they give us an opportunity to talk about some of the vulnerabilities of being human that a civilization that has learned to live, survive on timescales of thousands, even millions of years, may have forgotten what it's like to be mortal, what it's like to be so constrained. And so at our organization, we're looking at the feasibility of actually using the pandemic as an opportunity to reflect on how we can communicate something that has a profound impact on us. You know, when we think of a message, we want to say something that's going to be broadly representative of humankind. The coronavirus has impacted all of us, and it continues to. And so the focus of this conference is on imagining a post-coronavirus world. And I'd suggest we think not just in terms of what happens after we no longer need to shelter in place, what happens after the economy revives, but what impact can this moment have 100 or 1,000 years from now? And so the goal of sending messages to other civilizations is ultimately to get a response. And by sending messages that describe our experience with the coronavirus, we actually capture something that right now is earth-changing, and it is characterizing our time. Will it be remembered 100 years from now, 1,000 years from now? I think this is a moment that deserves to be remembered. And it's the kind of message that, again, we can start with some of those scientific concepts, you know, describing the spread of the virus over the three-dimensional surface of the world can be described in basic scientific terms and spatial terms. You know, we can talk about some of the biochemistry of the virus. We can talk about even how our social interactions are affected by the social distancing, where we stay 2 meters apart from one another, where we talk about ultimately the impact this has on our lives of needing to shift the way we relate to one another. So the effort to communicate with other civilizations is a long-term project, and it is an opportunity to reflect on ourselves, both who we are here on Earth and who we are in the cosmos. And so as an effort to capture something that is globally significant and characteristic of this particular time, I believe sending messages describing this period and how we are dealing with the coronavirus would provide a novel way of understanding ourselves and introducing ourselves to another civilization. Thanks.
Thank you very much. So what you've suggested is that some of the most significant aspects of the crisis so far are the way it suggests our shared vulnerabilities, the fact that the crisis has affected us, has caught our attention, in a certain way has helped us to consolidate our sense of what it means to be a human being on this planet, and that we may be able to distill certain ideas of who we are that we can try to consolidate into messages that we make available if one of the goals of interstellar communication is to convey in very precise and universal ways you know, the meaning of our species or the identity of our species. So have you and your colleagues already come up with certain lessons from the pandemic that you're attempting to somehow put into a particular form that can then be transmitted, even if we're not sure who or when it will ever be received?
Yeah, we have begun working on ways to talk about how the mechanisms by which the virus has traveled around the Earth. You know, some of the things that we talk about in basic principles of physics are how the coronavirus can be conveyed, you know, through aerosols. So at one level, we can describe this in reductionistic scientific terms, but of course that doesn't begin to capture the full experience. So we're in the midst of engaging people around the world. So we have input from people on 6 continents, I think about 30 countries or so, to really, and this is a project, in fact, that and that Abhik are involved in, which is first of all to characterize what impact has the coronavirus had on humankind? How are we reflecting on it in traditional media, so broadcast, print, online media, and social media, so that we come with preconceptions about what might be meaningful. We start with something scientific, but the goal is always to see how much beyond that we can get. We also have a group of linguists who are working on ways that we could add some intelligibility even to text messages. So we'll be collecting messages from people written in natural languages. We don't expect those to be clearly intelligible to another civilization, but there may be ways to unpack at least some of the meaning. I think the main thing we're mindful of is that an exchange with another civilization doesn't have to be accomplished all in one exchange. Scott, you and I are talking with one another, and it's a back and forth. We have questions. The challenge, though, is that back and forth with another civilization realistically takes decades or even centuries. And so that's why sustainability is built into our organization, because to accomplish our core scientific mission of establishing round-trip communication, we need to be supportive of sustaining the civilization as a whole.
Thank you. Let's see. It looks like we do have a question here. This, I don't know if you can see it on your screen, but I'll read it to you if you can't. Do you see it from Saranella Iovino?
I do not.
She's saying, great talk, Doug, thank you. Your perspective implies that we have a unitary planetary narrative on the coronavirus, but I'm afraid we don't even have regional narratives. What kind of perspectives are you planning on adopting for this enterprise?
Well, I think Saranella is absolutely right that there isn't a singular perspective. And that has been a limitation coming from this community of scientists searching for extraterrestrials. I think part of it is a reflection of who has been involved in these discussions. And as we were developing, especially during the 1980s, 1990s, ideas about what is the appropriate approach, there's a real emphasis on a diplomatic model, with some people saying we should go to the United Nations and get a singular message, a single consensus. And I think the reality, as Saranella is pointing out, is we don't, on some of the most important things, some of the richest, most meaningful things, we do not have a consensus. So instead, what we should be doing is highlighting different, even conflicting views and different interpretations. So I think that the challenge that we have always faced too in SETI is the search for extraterrestrial intelligence, is that many of the groups who are conducting the search itself are in either the United States or in Europe. And so it's really been hard to get the broader global input. One of the things that we're discovering with the coronavirus is that this is giving us a way to engage with communities that we haven't before through their own work on the coronavirus. I think you're muted, Scott.
Thank you. I have another question for you. This is from Professor Johan Hoagland. Thank you for this perspective. One of the few things that made it through the tremendous media noise of the pandemic was the news that some footage of what was defined as unidentified objects was authentic. This was certified by the DoD. Why do you think the DoD picked this particular moment to convey this news?
You know, there have been reports from the US Pentagon, the Department of Defense, of airplane pilots identifying objects, there being objects identified on radar. And one of the confusions, very understandable in the public, is that that's what we're searching for when we're trying to make contact with extraterrestrials. You know, I think if we do detect a signal someday and announce it, I think a lot of people are going to say, oh, well, of course, we knew it. You're finally admitting what everyone knew, that the public knows. I don't know that this announcement is particularly different from others, and I don't know that it is particularly monumental. So I don't interpret any of the announcements as saying we have discovered extraterrestrial intelligence, but that the US Department of Defense is saying we are acknowledging that we have identified something in the skies that is unexplained and unknown, thus the UFO, the unidentified part of it. So I personally wouldn't attribute this. I mean, I suppose you could say, oh, this is releasing this information when it won't be absorbed too much, or I haven't seen any information coming out as compelling evidence that they're extraterrestrials. Only that that this U.S. security departments are doing what I would expect them to do, which is try to understand what is going on in the atmosphere, and identify any threats that there might be. I don't have a sense that that's actually of extraterrestrial origin.
Thank you very much. It looks like we have another question now too, or comment from Greta Gard. But why don't we make this the final comment, and you can respond, Doug. And because I believe we're at the end of our time, and our colleagues elsewhere have been going at this all day long, or all night long in our time zone. So Greta says, critics on Earth may be concerned that we are not doing enough to communicate with, indeed listen to, those here on Earth, the Indian worker migrants, the precariat, and to not simply listen, but also to respond. Doesn't focusing on ET communications take funding away from more pressing social justice issues of urgent needs across different classes and nations? These critics would argue that ET intelligences are greater than ours, and if they wanted to talk with us, that desire would be immediately evident.
Yeah, I think that has always been the concern. You know, we saw it in the United States in the 1960s, as the United States was headed toward the moon. How can you justify spending billions of dollars to go to the moon when we have so many pressing problems here on our world? We founded our organization under the belief that you shouldn't have to choose between understanding the cosmos and helping humankind, and that in fact the two of them go together. So I think it's true that there may be a civilization out there that is much older than we are, sending messages our way. That's why we continue to support searching for those signals. And there are rationales why, you know, maybe they're waiting for us to take the initiative. Maybe that's what the Interstellar Protocol is. The less advanced civilization needs to initiate before they get a reply. So our goal is to try to increase the opportunities for getting a response back. But I think perhaps the most powerful impact of sending messages and then actually listening for a reply over timescales of hundreds or thousands of years is it fosters a sense that we as a civilization expect to be around for hundreds or thousands of years. So it may actually be the most transformative part of this work may not be actually making contact with the other long-lived civilization, but in the process of searching, becoming that civilization ourselves. So I agree that it is vital that we attend to our needs here on this world. I don't think that means we should then also neglect reaching out to other worlds.
And I see that we do have another question. I'm also mindful of the time, and I think we've slightly exceeded our time, but Harpreet Kaur has asked, she says, moving from a health, economic, geopolitical, social to an existential crisis, COVID-19 seems to be taking the humankind through this trajectory. What are the losses and the expected gains? I don't know if that's something you can really respond to. Yeah.
Yeah, but if you get to the PowerPoint, you'll see some of the slides that actually resonate with this concern about the existential, because I think that is one of the things that we have the hardest time facing right now. We're having that difficulty with the climate crisis. In a sense, we are forced to recognize even more directly the impact of this coronavirus. But I would take it that this existential crisis may be one of the most distinctive things that we have to communicate to other civilizations. And I think the multiple dimensions in that question, health, economic, geopolitical, social, existential, reflect the multiple levels that we need to approach to begin to get something that represents the impact of this on us.
Thank you. And I think these multiple levels of this situation, this crisis, are certainly what people are addressing throughout this conference, which is so multidimensional, so multidisciplinary and international. So thank you for adding yet another dimension to this conversation. I believe we're a little bit over time. And as I said, the rest of our colleagues have been going at this all day, and there's another day still to come tomorrow. So why don't we end this session? Thank you very much.
Very good. Thank you.
Thanks, Scott.
I would welcome all of you to reach out to me individually. Just go to our website, METI.org, and search for our board. I'm listed there. Reach out to me by email because I would love your input.